If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, long time ago, but thankfully, it helped me get all these different media gigs. I call games on television for CBS, on the radio for Westwood One. Also do the Eagles preseason games, do a bunch of other radio stuff. Hopefully, a lot of you already listen or watch youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Second week in a row where we had a special Tuesday episode. We do 3 days a week in the off season. But we usually do always Monday and always either Thursday or Friday, primarily Thursday, and then usually Wednesday. But second week in a row, we had a Tuesday. I got some travel coming up, which is why Greg Cosell was excellent talking about Stingley with the Texans and the Bengals getting their receiver signed, and of course, breaking down the running backs for the 2025 NFL draft. If you like the draft, if you like betting on the draft, make sure you're listening or watching the series with Greg Cosell, position by position, or the College Draft Podcast with Emery Hunt, who makes all the college football bets during the season on that College Draft Podcast. Make sure you're checking that out again, either on audio or youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. We will discuss this week and next week on the Fantasy Feast podcast the landing spots via free agency for all the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. If you want to think about that from a fantasy football perspective, or just start to put your prop bet hat on, if you will. You can always check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Steve is the star of this show. He is a absolute treasure, both on social media at Fezzik Sports and right here on the Even Money Betting Podcast. The great, of course, Steve Fezzik. Here's what we got, Steve. Obviously, I got to get your thoughts on March Madness. What bets to make, what bets not to make, what the pros do, what they don't do. Certainly we'll get into your advice for filling out brackets. You gave some of it last week in terms of knowing how big the pool is. Hopefully people took that into account. We have a baseball game going on right now. The Phillies opening day is like 10 days away. I had no idea there was a baseball game that counted right now going on as we're recording this very early on a Tuesday morning. So we got to get to that, Steve, with you momentarily as well. I should mention, I sent an email out. For those of you that get our emails, you have to sign up for them at rosstucker.com. It's once a month, if that. I sent an email out for advice. I didn't specifically ask for this, but I want it. What do you guys think about maybe having 2 episodes, or maybe just longer episodes of the Even Money Podcast during the season? Hit me up on social at Ross Tucker NFL or us at Ross Tucker Pod. You can DM at Ross Tucker Pod, or your best bet, email me ross at rosstucker.com, or just go to the website. We want to know your thoughts. We go pretty quick on Even Money Podcast during the season. Would you like us to spend a little bit more time on each game and either have a longer episode or do 2 episodes? Hit us up via email over at rosstucker.com so we know your answers. Steve, before we get into anything else, since there's actually a game going on, you were texting with me about Major League Baseball. I guess we can get more of your Major League Baseball bets next week in terms of season win totals, because most of the season doesn't start for like 9 or 10 days, right?
That's right, but there's the Tokyo series, Dodgers, Cubs, promoting MLB in Japan, And as we are recording, it is 3-1. Dodgers are ahead against the Cubs, and it is prompting me to make a bet, to double down on a bet I've already made, but we're going to bet more on it now. So at DraftKings, Dodgers to have the number 1 seed in the National League minus 160. I won't bore you with all the details. The over-under for the Dodgers is 104.5 is pretty much the market number in terms of their season win. Nobody else in the National League is even at 93, Ross. So think about this. The Dodgers, if they win 102 games, they're going to significantly underperform, but they're still going to be a pretty big favorite to win this bet. And the fact that they're up 3-1 in the 8th inning, they're probably going to win today, which means their season win number should be closer to 105. It is an outstanding wager. It's a best bet. Dodgers to have the best record in the National League.
What do you think the number should be? What do you think the odds should be?
Probably minus 220, take back plus 220. More, they'll do it about 70% of the time.
What is that? What is take back minus? Like when you say a term I don't know, I got to ask.
Yeah, so I'm giving you what I call a no vig line. If I was in a betting exchange, by example, and I had to set the line on both sides, Dodgers versus the field, the Dodgers minus 200 would be too light. They're going to win this bet more than 67% of the time. That's what the minus 200 number would be. So I'll make the Dodgers, got to risk 220 to win 100 on the Dodgers, or you could have the field, the rest of the National League, bet 100 to win 220.
So is this not on some level, Steve, a needle in the haystack that you don't like to bet a lot of times?
Well, it's a monster favorite, so it's the opposite of the needle in the haystack. It's the sun will come up tomorrow, sure thing type of bet. All right, the Dodgers, things could go wrong, but I mean, just from a whole lot has to go wrong this year. People are talking about the Dodgers setting the all-time MLB baseball betting record of 118 wins, Ross, which is silly. But I like the Dodgers over. I think the Dodgers are going to win 107 games. I don't think anyone else in the National League is going to win 98. So you got a big cushion versus all my handicaps.
Why do you think more people aren't making that bet? And/or why do you think DraftKings has it priced the way they do?
Because people like to bet needle in the haystack bets, and they don't like to tie up their money till October betting minus 160 favorites.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time on, and we can talk more about baseball bets next week. We're going to spend a lot of time on March Madness, the bets you have for this week, your bracket advice. But listen, we are always going to be all over anything NFL betting related. So I do have to ask you a couple things, Steve, before we get to the March Madness stuff. Number one, last week when we recorded, I don't think the Daniel Jones news had happened. We talked about Darnold and Geno Smith. You love Geno Smith for the Raiders. We did not talk about Daniel Jones to the Colts as far as I could remember. Your thoughts on the impact Daniel Jones going to the Colts has?
I think it does have a significant impact, and here's why. I don't have him any better than Richardson. I've got them about the same. But Richardson is a much higher variance quarterback, and he's injury prone. So if you just went with Richardson, you are very vulnerable to the wheels coming off and the Colts just having a horrific season if he can't play, which is unlikely, but could happen. Or two, if he's injured and can't play, which is much more likely. So having a guy that's every bit as good a quarterback as a backup, or could even be the starter, absolutely helps the Colts' futures.
Interesting. Okay. But that's interesting to me that you think Daniel Jones and Richardson are on the same level. I don't think the Colts feel that way. I don't think they would have given Daniel Jones $13.5 million if they thought those guys were the same. But maybe. I think they say it's an open competition. Maybe it is. It would seem to me like Daniel Jones has a heads up there. What about, I got to ask you, it's not too far from Indy, Cincinnati. Do you think that the Bengals paid both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as a direct reaction to your quote last week about how frugal they are and they've been that way for 30 years?
I think they did it as a direct reaction to keep Joe Burrow happy. And let's face it, you've got to keep your franchise quarterback in a good place. So I think how often you're going to have a franchise quarterback, you got to go ahead and keep his weapons there.
Got it. Okay. And then the last NFL thing, unless there's something else that's jumped out to you over the course of the last week or so, and in terms of any of the other moves that were made, the last one that really jumps out to me, I'm curious. It feels like there are multiple teams that are interested in Aaron Rodgers and or Russell Wilson. It feels like Russell Wilson's the backup plan for the Steelers and the Giants if they don't get Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers reportedly wants to be in Minnesota with the Vikings. I got two Aaron Rodgers related questions. One is, what's the difference in how you feel about the Vikings if they got Aaron Rodgers to start versus going with J.J. McCarthy, the youngster who didn't play at all as a rookie with the injury?
Only the Vikings know how good J.J. McCarthy is. It's a great unknown, right? So both those quarterbacks, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, I would have rated right around to start the season as an average quarterback. Now, at some point, Aaron Rodgers is going to fall off the cliff, like Favre did. When quarterbacks get to be 41, it's not unusual that they start the season okay, and at the end of the year, they can't play a lick. So I would much prefer Russell Wilson, but I really don't know about McCarthy and what his progress has been so far.
Interesting. Okay. So you much prefer Russell Wilson over Aaron Rodgers at this point?
Yeah, I think in September, they're probably about the same. By November, and I understand Russell Wilson is, in the twilight of his career, but Rodgers could be completely washed this year. He could be terrible. He could be. Remember when the ostrich replaced Peyton Manning? That sort of thing could happen.
It's a really good point. Peyton Manning all of a sudden was just not good. And by the way, he won a Super Bowl that year, and Brett Favre the year before was awesome. The next year it was bad. Even Breeze that last year. It is interesting because Brady's one of the few that was still playing pretty darn well that last year when he retired, which is just remarkable because these other guys, when they get to late 30s or certainly early 40s, boy, it does feel like you can see it.
Yeah, and I think when you look at LeBron James or Tom Brady, these guys are aliens. They're spending millions every year on their bodies to preserve their playing careers, and that's just not normal. That's not what most players are doing.
March Madness NCAA tournament is here. One of the best times of the year to get a delicious Smirnoff. Maybe if you're skiing all day, like I'm going to be this weekend, you have some Pedialyte or Gatorade Zero, tastes delicious with your vodka, and then you're hydrating while you're getting a little vodka in there. They're also sponsoring this show. They're sponsoring the draft. They're sponsoring everything because Smirnoff's awesome and it's affordable, which I really appreciate. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Okay, let's get to March Madness, Steve. There's a lot to get to here with the NCAA tournament. Let's start with this. What bets are you and or the pros making? How do you guys treat March Madness?
So when the lines first come up, we're looking for games that are misaligned, and I'll throw three of them out to you, but the problem is the lines have moved, so this isn't really worthwhile, but I love fading the Big Ten champ every year. So, and famously, I lost a ton of money not doing that when Purdue won the Big Ten and then lost in the first round. I lost $1 zillion betting them to win as a 1 seed. But Michigan, that was such a huge run for them. UC San Diego, games in Denver. I took San Diego +3. You need 3. I think it'll probably go back to +3. That's a bet I made. and I'm high on this Grand Canyon team. I took Grand Canyon plus the points against Maryland, and I look a lot at venues. The game's in Seattle, and I love a neutral site that I don't think is going to be neutral. Because if I'm just the casual Seattle fan watching some basketball, am I going to root for Maryland or the Cinderella Grand Canyon? I have seen this numerous times. In fact, I'm old enough. I remember being in Dayton, Ohio, and Kansas was playing UTEP. And Kansas is closer to Dayton than UTEP. The crowd turned on the Jayhawks in the second half because everyone loves that Cinderella. So oftentimes, all of the crowd that has no dog in the fight, no affiliation with the schools, they're going to cheer like crazy for the underdog.
All right, so you're fading the Big Ten champ Michigan. You're fading Maryland. It sounds like, Steve, more or less you're anti-Big Ten. Why is that?
I test whenever I watch the SEC. It just seems like the athletes are at so much a higher level than what I'm seeing from the Big Ten schools. And that's always dangerous because, I'm not a talent evaluator, just what my eyes personally see. I will say this, and I never hear this from anyone else. I love stacking brackets by conference. What the heck am I talking about? We talk about in fantasy football, stacking quarterbacks with wide receivers. I stack conferences. Find out a conference that you're high on or low on. If you're low on them, like the Big Ten, we'll fade them all. Look to have all of these teams, the Wisconsins, the Michigan States, the Michigans, and have them go less deep in the tournament than is expected. And so if you're directionally right about that conference not being as good as it was supposed to be, think about how successful you can be. Now, in your own betting, you can parlay these teams together. I would call it a slight correlation where if you wanted to play some parlays, anti-Big Ten, by example, that's something to consider also.
Ooh, okay. That's very, very interesting in terms of stacking brackets by conference. Just to explain that, Steve, you basically, if there's a conference you love, when in doubt, you push those guys forward to win their matchups. If there's a conference you really don't love, you do the opposite.
Exactly right. So by example, when I'm filling out my bracket, obviously Duke's favored to come out of the East, but I am very high on the SEC. And so in the semis, I'm going to have Tennessee beating Duke because I guess that's, in the semis. Because I'm so high on the SEC that if my other SEC teams get through, then Tennessee's probably power rate a little bit higher than we have them currently, and certainly viable, good enough to beat Duke.
Got it. Okay. What about, I guess, just in general, is NCAA tournament huge for the pros? Because it is huge for our listeners or people checking us out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. The NCAA tournament is a huge, especially this first weekend, huge betting weekend. Is it like that for the pros too, Steve?
Not so much, because let's face it, during the regular season, there's 100 games. There's always injury information. Dudes that were supposed to be playing aren't playing. There's going to be games that are misaligned by 3 points. That's not going to be the case during the NCAA tournament. Now, it used to be. I remember one year Vermont was playing Syracuse, and Vermont had a really good team, and they're catching 12 when the lines came out. And every day the line dropped by a point, and I think it closed 8. That would never happen in today's day and age. These lines correct so quickly and move so quickly. Now, there are advantages, though. 2 advantages I can cite. You can bet whatever you want. Really high limits on these games. So if you do like a game, you can get down a lot. And there's a lot of promotions. There's -105 pricing at various places. So you may well be able to get, a much better vigorish or bargain on what you're wagering on, along with the big limits. And this is the one time a year, similar to the Super Bowl. We talk about the Super Bowl. The betting public can take over a line and move it. The best example, I give it all the time, is when Denver was playing Green Bay in the Super Bowl. That's an Elway team, a dynasty Denver team. they're catching 11 against Green Bay. How could that possibly have been the case? Well, the public, was backing the Super Bowl champion Green Bay in that case. And the public likes to back favorites in the NCAA tournament, even though dogs historically do better. So one of my favorite angles, Thursday night and Friday night, the first 2 days of the tournament, Ross, the late games. If I start seeing steam on the favorite, that's usually not the pros betting. That's just the public firing. And let's face it, if there's a lot of favorites that are covering during a day, it will become like a cascade of more and more money being bet on the favorites as the public is winning. And that does happen some years.
Absolutely love watching college hoops once the tournament starts, and you guys can drink some Labatt Blue Lights like I'll be drinking, and you can get cool gear. It's called Buy Beer, Get Gear. Go to rewards.labattusa.com to sign up. You get points for every purchase at any store, bar, or stadium, any size, any product, anywhere you're buying Labatt. Just upload it instantly. They'll be getting points on the court. You get points off the court. Rewards.labattusa.com. What about this, Steve? What about, like, you watch Thursday, and let's say any conference. Let's say the SEC, all of a sudden, they all struggle and they don't cover. Or you mentioned Big Ten or whatever. Do you just immediately fire on the games involving that conference on Friday?
I don't fire on them all, but I would have a rule. Let's say the SEC lays an egg and none of their teams cover Thursday. Then on Friday, I'd say, well, there's no way I'm betting on any SEC teams, and I'm going to selectively bet against the remaining ones in the games that I think are appropriate.
Got it. Okay. Do you fill out a bracket?
Yeah, because I have to, but I don't submit it. My bracket up, right? So, I mean, but I don't take it seriously. And well, why don't I take it seriously? Because there's a limited number of time in the day, and I could spend 48 hours working on my bracket and depending on how large the bracket is, we talked about this. If there's just a dozen people in my bracket, I'm going to take mostly favorites. If it's 1 million people, I'm going to take BYU to make the Final Four. And I do like BYU as a dark horse if you're looking to win a big bracket. So because of that, the times suck. It's just I just don't have enough time. I got NIT games. I got baseball. I got too much other things to prepare for to properly go through and fill out all these different, because it's not like I can just fill out one bracket. Depending upon the rules of the bracket and do I get extra value for underdogs, I've got to tweak my bracket and change it for the rules and the sample size.
What about, Steve, anything with totals in these games? I know last week you talked about conference tournaments. You look to play first half unders. I don't know how they performed for you and whether or not you have anything with totals for the NCAA tournament.
So the conference tournaments, you want to play first half unders in general, especially early games, but only if you got bubble teams or teams that need to win to get into the tournament. So it doesn't do you any good to play a Kentucky first half under where it's happy action fun time, if both teams know they're in the tournament. But now that we're in the big dance, the same concept does apply both. It's a critically important game. All things being equal, the ideal under is an early start time in an empty arena to play the first half under. And that's a strategy that has won year after year after year. And the beauty is the public loves betting overs. So oftentimes you may not get a good number right now, but it's not unusual that you'll see a higher number pop up when the public starts firing on these games.
By the way, very few things annoy me as much as watching these March Madness games and you see an entire section, nobody's sitting in there because they're all coming for the next game to see their school play. And it's like, it bothered me more when I was younger, but it's like you can't go an hour earlier and watch like a March Madness game on a ticket you already paid for. Like you dislike basketball that much that you don't want to see another NCAA tournament game. Like I always thought that was crazy. What about, Steve, bet sizing? Anything in particular with bet sizing?
Yeah, the pros really don't change their bet sizing. We bet 2% of bankroll on a normal play, and that's pretty much the same case. Maybe a little bit less on a typical Saturday in college basketball, because let's face it, we might bet 30 games. Okay, so 30 games times 2%, that's 60% of your entire bankroll. That's crazy. So we're betting more of our bankroll on a typical Saturday than we would during the NCAA tournament. Now, there's some people disagree with me. I mean, I'm not necessarily speaking for every pro. I mean, famously in the book The Odds, Alan Boston talked about his enormous bets he would make during the March Madness time of the year. So he would contrast with my strategy, where I'd be like, it's just there's only 16 games a day. I mean, how much am I going to bet when there's only 16 games and there might be 3 good bets on sides on the board?
I would just think there's so much more public money that there'd be more opportunity. Where am I wrong there?
Yeah, well, the problem is the public money is spread over 16 games, so it doesn't impact the lines that much until later in the day. You're right. I would say Thursday afternoon, Thursday night, Friday night. That's when the public money really starts churning. A lot of these guys come to Vegas. They arrive Wednesday night at midnight, Ross. They're flying in. They're hitting the blackjack tables. They're not even up yet until Thursday at noon. And 3 of the games are already done.
Next week, we'll get Steve's Sweet 16 thoughts, his Major League Baseball season total bets, and of course, any other NFL news like we always do. Other than that, good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.